So it is my great pleasure to give you a warm welcome to Columbia University. I am Sandra Lee, and I have the distinct honor of directing the Division of Ethics in the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics in the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons in our Uptown Health Sciences campus here at Columbia University. I will say that here on the Morningside campus, those in the room certainly know that nearby are students who are demonstrating over the turmoil that has unfolded over the last several months. The expression of differences of opinion towards durable solutions in many ways is the work of ethics. And as such, despite the discomfort we might have experienced trying to navigate to this lecture room, this event today, it feels that we are doing the right thing in the right place, coming together to discuss the critical role of ethics on the most pressing and challenging threats to human flourishing. Our department and division of ethics launched in 2019 in part to answer the question, how can ethics and the humanities center justice as a guiding principle in biomedical research and clinical care? What if we could leverage multidisciplinary expertise and knowledge to solve the most dogged problems related to inequality, inequity, and an injustice so that all peoples could flourish and thrive? After 2 decades at Stanford, I headed east to Columbia, drawn by the deep scholarly commitment to ethics as a field of inquiry and action that can make meaningful difference. And I'm thrilled that the division has grown with scholars focused on conceptual, empirical, and policy-related research addressing ethical questions raised by emerging technologies such as gene sequencing, machine learning, digital health, and their implications on health inequity. Our Ethics Grand Round series last year focused on mass incarceration and its impact on the health of communities, families, and individuals, a sustained year-long conversation which has informed a National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine meeting in 2 weeks that will bring national expertise to bear on questions of imprisonment and health disparities. This year, we're absolutely delighted to be collaborating with the Greenwall Foundation, a bright light and pillar of bioethics scholarship and action, and to co-sponsor the William C. Stubing Lecture. The focus of this evening's discussion on climate change and health kicks off our year-long ethics grand rounds on the ethical imperative to confront climate change in order to alleviate human suffering. So before I move to the introductions, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Division of Ethics team, David Lamb, Tiana Sipapur, and Rachel Yarmolinsky, without whom this event would not be possible. I am grateful to them every day. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Michel Groman, who is President and CEO of the Greenwall Foundation. As a thought leader in translating bioethics scholarship into high-impact real-world applications, Michel leads the Greenwall Foundation's vision of making bioethics integral to decisions in healthcare policy and research. And I'm delighted to welcome Michel to Columbia and to the stage.
Thank you, Sandra. And good evening. Let me add my welcome to this year's William C. Stubing Memorial Lecture, to those of you in the room and to those of you joining us online by webcast. I'm thrilled to be here in this beautiful space to have this conversation with you all tonight. I also want to extend my thanks to Sandra, to everyone at Columbia's Division of Ethics for partnering with us for tonight's event. I want to acknowledge the social and political moment that we're in, that is really underscored by the protests happening today on Columbia's campus. It's a time when we are increasingly polarized, when difficult conversations are harder and harder to have. But we must have them, we must engage, and bioethics can provide a model for how to navigate tension and discomfort, hold multiple things as true, and come together rather than turn away. I am proud to continue to support critical conversations like the one we are having tonight, and I'm glad that all of you have joined us for it. As Sandra mentioned, at the Greenwall Foundation, we seek to make bioethics integral to decisions in healthcare, policy, and research. One of the foundation's core strategic priorities is to shape and support a broader bioethics, to widen the lens of inquiry that this field pursues. Tonight's conversation is in this spirit, as we apply the questions that bioethics asks to a pair of topics, climate change and mental health, whose intersection demands further attention. I could not introduce tonight's lecture without first saying a few words about Bill Stubing, the lecture's namesake, who served as president of the Greenwall Foundation from 1990 to 2011 and passed away in 2015. Under his leadership, the foundation developed its focus on bioethics and became the field's primary private funder. He particularly understood that bioethics needed a pipeline of talent, and he oversaw the creation of the Greenwall Foundation's Faculty Scholars Program, which remains our flagship investment. Bill was an ordained Lutheran minister and educator who first served as a headmaster of a parochial school and later turned his professional career toward medicine, ethics, and the arts. Although traditional in style, Bill relished radical ideas, regularly took risks, and as a funder sought out controversial, important work from which others shied away. The Greenwall Foundation's hope for the lecture that bears Bill's name is to model vigorous and civil discourse on bioethics issues that demand public attention. This evening's topic is exactly that sort of conversation. Bill's impact on this foundation and the world more broadly is profound. I'm glad that we're joined today by his friends and family, including his husband and life partner, Ron Thomas. And I'm glad that we can continue to honor Bill's legacy so fittingly through this lecture series. Now, a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. We will have about 20 minutes for questions from the audience at the close of our moderated conversation, and we will get to as many as we can. If you are in the room, we have cards to write your questions on available at your seats. You can pass them forward to me or hand them to one of our staff members. Could staff give a quick wave? Great, thank you. If you are watching online, feel free to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. You can also join the conversation online using the hashtag Stubing2023. The webcast is closed captioned, and we will be recording today's discussion and sharing it following the event. We'll send a link to all those who registered. I'm now pleased to introduce today's moderator, Michel Martin. She is the host of NPR's Morning Edition and a contributor to PBS's Amanpour and Company. She is an award-winning radio host on topics running the gamut, from politics to international affairs to climate change, a world-class reporter and communicator. Michel, I turn the stage over to you.
Thank you all for coming. We know that there was a lot of competition for your time and attention. So I'm going to ask if we could just start by taking a breath together. I think we all need it. Can we do that? Just take a breath.
Can we take a couple?
We can. Let's just be fully present. You've given us permission to be together. You've given yourselves permission to think about something that isn't easy to think about. So let's take advantage of this time together, and one more breath. Okay. The highest compliment that Duke Ellington, native Washingtonian, great composer, a band leader, could make of someone was that they are beyond category. Beyond category. And I think our next guest fits that description. He's a physician, he's a scholar, an historian. He's been a researcher, a practitioner, and has given himself permission to think really big thoughts, the kind of really big thoughts that don't often help you keep a job in government. So with that being said, I mean, he's a professor, he's fancy, he's got all these titles. I'll read you some of them just because, you know, in case your mom's watching, she wants me to read them.
My mom is watching.
Exactly, right? Your mom wants to read it. He's a psychiatrist who approaches mental health as a building block of social policy and progress, He recently founded Billion Minds as a think action tank, and I want to hear more about that. Before joining city government, he was a medical director for behavioral health across the Health and Hospitals Corporation. He's director of the NYU program in global mental health. He has an undergraduate and MD, you know that. He has an MPH. He has a PhD in the history of science. If any of you are feeling sort of a little inferior at the moment, I do not blame you. And he's currently a professor here at Columbia. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thanks for doing this. I really appreciate also the honor to be here, and Michelle and to whoever it was that was responsible for inviting me to talk on this topic and to spotlight this connection between mental health and climate change, but also thinking differently about mental health. We don't talk about that enough.
So let's just jump right into the question. Can mental health save the world? Nothing big at all.
Yes. So we're done. There we go. Yes, and I was thinking, well, where's a place to start into that? Yes, so I think it depends on what we mean by mental health. So I'll give you a little taste of how I was mentored to get to rethink about it. Kind of unlearned a lot of my psychiatry. There was one particular person, Tony Earls, Felton Earls, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School Emeritus now. And I was running the, I was either just leaving or I was still at the Eric Lindemann Mental Health Center, which was the public sort of medical, community mental health center affiliated with Mass General Hospital, which is where I was trained. And I sought out Tony because he was doing really interesting work on the strength of communities. He was a psychiatrist. And so I was curious, like, how did he connect those? So he told this story now in books and publicly, why he chose child psychiatry. And he was working as a pediatric intern in Metropolitan Hospital, not far from here. 15-year-old boy comes in, having been stabbed. He takes care of him, was admitted. Before the boy leaves, asked to meet with Tony. And the kid says to him, Tony, well, Dr. Earls, I guess, you did a really good job for me. You're working here tonight because I'm going to stab the guy who stabbed me, and I want to make sure you take good care of him. And so Tony writes about how what do I do? And the advice he got was, you should call the police, you should. And so he says something like, I did the only thing I thought I should do, which was I took him home. And he went to talk with his parents at the dinner table about what was happening. And I took away sort of three things. I mean, there are lots of takeaways from that story, but as I look back on it, what threads that I see that I've tried to carry through from that is, one, that the solutions are out there, not in the usual places that mental health professionals are in, but the solutions for a lot of these issues that come into our doors are outside the doors. That the micro and the macro connect to each other, talk to each other, that his revenge plays out and multiplies at around community level revenge and violence, and cycles back to reinforce and aggravate individual revenge and violence. So the micro and the macro connect, and that psychiatrists can enter that space and help open up and remake the space that we talk about these things and the dots that we connect about them. But it has to be intentional. It's work to work in that way.
Why did you want to be a psychiatrist to begin with?
It was a mix of reasons. One, it was very personal. A friend of mine in medical school committed suicide. And it was the days before my psychiatry clerkship. And I was angry at the profession. I wanted to show me what you got because you failed, my friend. And I think I've always carried a bit of that anger, frustration with me, that we just don't do this well. We do this whole mental health thing, and very restrained, constrained ways that aren't out there where the hard stuff is happening. And I was always interested in being a doctor, but I was always a little bit ambivalent about it because it seemed to be somewhat distant from society, and yet was working on things that were really often decisive engines of social outcomes and progress and conditions. Who gets sick, who doesn't, how that travels, what effects it has intergenerationally, and so forth. So I felt that psychiatry got closest to that, but wasn't doing it optimally.
You think you started out with a kind of a chip on your shoulder about it? Let me show you how to do it. Or do you think that you started, because I mean, a lot of people who had the experience that you had would go in completely a different direction. They might go to, say, emergency room medicine, which is, look, let me just put my hands on you and fix this thing, right? I'm just
But the
curious.
thing to fix is outside the emergency room. And that's what I wanted to get closer to.
When did you start to question, it's one of the hardest things, I think. I'm sure there are a lot of different disciplines represented in this room, but just being a sort of a journalist, right? You get into the thing and you're so excited to be in it. It kind of generally takes a while before you think, you know what, this particular thing about this thing is kind of messed up. You know what I mean? Like, you have to go through that initial excitement of, wow, I'm in it, like I'm in it. And then you think, wait a minute, this is not right. Or I'm just wondering when that moment came for you. And I want to have you dig a little deeper into just the ways in which medical care is siloed and psychiatry is siloed, and how it's sort of individual and personal, and it becomes hard to kind of look at the big picture. But I'm just wondering, at what point did that come for you? Where it sounds in a way you started there.
It became more tangible. I was deputy in the chief of psychiatry, Bellevue Hospital here in New York. And remember, I was doing some night shifts in our psychiatric emergency room. And I just thought, we're so downstream we're just the receiving end of what the world is beating up people. And we're at the end of that. And so how do we, the typical, public health approach, go upstream, but people weren't really, and we're still not really talking about how do we do that around mental health. I think there was greater awareness that the world is beating up people, and that is a real driver of things that we consign to the political realm to fix. But it's incapable of it because they don't know anything about healing beat up people. And so we have what we know has a lot to contribute, but we're positioned to use what we know in ways that help people, but are not, we're just aiming too low.
Well, the political system is good at something. The political system is good at getting food to people who don't have it. It's good at, turning the lights on, paving road. So tell me more about why you say it's not good at healing people who are being beaten up.
It's not good at aiming for well-being as its purpose. It could be a side effect. So is it getting food to people in a way that they feel safe? Is it paving roads in ways that people feel their community is connected? Is it, what are the outcomes of these things? And it turns out, and actually, Tony Earls, who I mentioned, the next 50 years of his work really put meat on the bones of those sorts of ideas, that what he did was the right thing, that the problems out there, the micro and macro fuel each other, and that we can think about mental health differently to catalyze different sorts of things. I mean, if every household was helped to be a holding environment to air struggles that people were having, then I think mental health could save the world. But then we have to build it that way. And it takes a lot of parts of society to agree that that's how we're going to build it.
So I want to hear more about how you started to try to build it in your own way, but I still, before we move on, I do want to hear a little bit more. Did you have a eureka moment? I mean, you talked about kind of, you're in the night shift at Bellevue, having been at Bellevue, I can see where it could be dispiriting in a number of ways, but was there a eureka moment? Was there like one person, one case where you thought, wait a minute, this could be different? Did it come to you that way, or was it a series of ways that it came to you?
It was, I left the country. So I started hearing about work that was going on in more economic development focused efforts. So the Millennium Villages Project, which people may or might not be familiar with, Jeffrey Sachs, who's started the Earth Institute here at Columbia University, tried to go about development in a way that connected these dots, that social conditions bred health conditions, bred social conditions, bred health conditions. So how do we break those cycles and invest in communities to do that? And so I spent some time with what they were doing because I thought the way they were doing health, we could do mental health. It was more an instinct at the time than an operationalizable idea. But a lot of it involves skilling up community members to do a lot of the work that are left for institutions to do, or embedding the work in other work. So if you're bringing health work into school settings, or just other trusted places and networks within faith communities and so forth. So really changing the real estate of how health work was done, which meant also bringing the community in as a participant and a co-creator and a thought partner about what the priorities were and what these linkages were with how hard it is to farm and how depressed I am, or, and so on. And so I saw the doability. I mean, there's a lot of literature. There's a lot of science that shows these dots are real, that things like measurable hope, despair, predict things like premature mortality and community violence, and they all mutually reinforce each other. So these emotional grapple hooks, these ways in to these cascades of ongoing social problems is where we should be inserting ourselves, because we actually know how to promote hope, how to promote pro-social sorts of connections. We know how to buffer people from depression and trauma, but it's communal work, and you have to redesign how you do it.
So, this is so interesting to me because I'm saying, for people who, have you heard about Thrive New York? Have you all heard about it? Okay, so I'm going to have some of you heard about it. Some of you have not heard about it. Fair? Is that accurate? Okay, so I'm going to have you describe it so that we can see it. Because, thriving, like, what does that mean? For some people, it means like, I have a lot of stuff and I feel happy because I have a lot of stuff. For some people, it means I have deep connections so that I know who I am in this world and I feel sort of safe, sort of good. I want to hear, how kind of you constructed it. But the first thing that comes to mind in hearing you talk about it is, it seems like one of the difficulties of constructing that in the United States is that this is a very individualistic society, right? Like, some cultures, countries, communities highly value community, interpersonal, community connection. Like here, if you're like, your kid's not potty trained by 3 and they're like sleeping in their own bed, when they're 2 months old, you're a failure, you're wrong. And so I'm just wondering, like, what was the first, did you have to break your own sort of sense of what well-being means in order to kind of be able to see that at first? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like,
it resonated with me personally, but also with what I was seeing, as a psychiatrist, broken homes, with, but not just in the psychiatric space. We see that in every space. I mean, my wife is a New York City public high school principal. The degree that she, rates that her students, the percent of her students who have faced trauma, faced loss, faced ways of feeling diminished agency, marginalized, and all of that plays out. And if she's going to be a good school, she has to be able to be smart about where they're at emotionally and speak to it and help her teachers be skilled about it. So job training programs. You walk into a job training program is where you'll probably find some of the highest rates of depression, just by people who are sitting, waiting to be spoken to. All of this emotional weight degrades all of these social spaces. It makes them harder to be successful. It makes it harder for people to be successful. And how do we make our communities, our neighborhoods, all these social spaces, mental health promoting engines, rather than just let that weight continue to buckle what's possible? And we are buckling. We're in the midst of a mental health crisis, and we can feel it. We can feel it everywhere in every social space, in our politics, in our media. It's mostly affecting kids disproportionately, but adults, particularly middle-aged and particularly white middle-aged adults, who are dying sooner because of that weight. It just makes everything harder. And the more we let that weight get heavier, it makes it harder to try to undo the social glue, to reconnect the social glue that is not there.
Let me just do a check-in. Those who are here that I can see, do you broadly accept what, do you want me to call you Gary or Dr. Belkin? Gary's good? Is Gary good? Okay, Mom, Dr. Belkin, Gary. For your mom that's listening, Dr. Belkin, Gary, do you broadly accept and see what Gary's talking about? That there's a mental health, I don't know, crisis, would you say crisis, something that's sort of happening? For those of you who don't agree with that, we'd love to entertain your questions later. In the question and answer period, I'd love to hear your thoughts about why that's not the case. But could you do you mind give us some parameters about why you say that? Why do you say that there is that?
Well, we just know from prevalence that, rates of, particularly, for example, among youth, of depression, of suicidal ideation, of anxiety, is, depending on when and where, double, post-COVID, double, tripled, and even in some places quadrupled baseline levels. So we know from that perspective. But what we often do then is we say, well, and this is a good thing to do, there should be more treatment, but what we don't do is think about, okay, what is the cumulative impact of that on our community, on these other other things we're trying to do as communities.
Do you think, is COVID a key factor here, or do you think it predates that, or is
the relationships hold across cultures and across time? That this social ecology of mental health, that promoting mental health promotes other social outcomes, deteriorating social outcomes also diminish mental health. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just like incidental impacts. If one tries to bolster either end of that connection, you can get an expansive effect. So you work on the social end and people get greater mental well-being. You work on the well-being side. But we don't have the operating system to both be attentive to those signals, and to respond. So you mentioned Thrive was very much an effort to try to fix that. Mm-hmm. So we have a model where, and I'll relate this to climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get there. I promise. We're going to get there. We're definitely going to get there, but I want to sort of set the table.
Yeah. So what Thrive wanted to acknowledge is that we have a fundamental health system which just assumes that help happens in a given room that you have to wait 3 months to get into for a 15 more half-hour visit every who knows what. And yet the drivers of most mental illness, or what distressed people go to get help for, is, if not caused, certainly exacerbated by what is happening in the rest of their life and what's happening in the rest of these other places. So one of the things that I learned when I got involved in these other sorts of approaches in Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean, I worked with health NGOs like Partners in Health after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, which was really the first time I got granularly involved in putting down this idea that the people are going to be the front end of the mental health system, that we're going to train community members to care for each other. And there's now a whole field called task sharing of the many skills that are often reserved to come to people like me for, that can be done by anybody.
Well, that's kind of mind-blowing right there.
But from
I mean, I'm sorry, I have to say, until I started reading your work, the idea that that kind of mental health assistance or kind of coaching or support could come in some other way than like go to somebody's office for an hour or whatever it is, 50 minutes, whatever, you know, if you can find somebody. I don't know.
And those
Never occurred to me.
Those sort of skills can help people for serious illness and for more of this more preventive promotion sorts of well-being reinforcing sorts of.
Well, what does it look like? Help me see it. What does it look like? Yeah.
So what we did with Thrive was we trained school teachers, job training program counselors, clergy, staff at homeless shelters, all in different skills. Cure violence interrupters. So formerly incarcerated members of community who come to try to counsel youth out of retributional violence, talking about you know where Tony was at. But we train them in motivational interviewing skills. We trained job training program counselors, similar thing, and also how to screen for distress or disorders. We trained moms in New York City public housing to run evidence-based pro-attachment coaching skill building groups with other moms from the same building.
Presumably you didn't call it that. What did you call it so that people would want to show up? Because I think if I saw that on the board of the community room, I'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. What did you call it? What did you say that? How to be a better
I don't know
mom?
what we called it.
How to be a better mom?
You'd be
What you call
surprised.
it?
You know, when I've learned, you know, we built Thrive, which became a 54 initiative, massive effort that built capacity in all these other places, all these non-mental health clinic places to do the whole range that I described of work. But with, in some way or another, the mental health system is coach, anchor, and backup. And I think that's really critical, because to me, that's the smart division of labor. Disperse what's dispersible and have a backup that helps and is there. And that's rather than having the mental health center as the front, back, and side door. It's the backup to a whole expanded front door. But often when we went to, so the Thrive initiatives were distributed across 20 city agencies. So we did things in senior centers and just of a similar version of what I'm saying, skilling up differently. And I would lead with not, oh, we should do a depression program here. We would ask, what's hard for you? You know, like the chancellor of Department of Education. What could you use help with? Well, graduating students. Well, we know something about that, because who are the students that are dropping out? Why? And where is something from the psychological toolkit that is now missing, that we can build? And we did a ton with the school system, because we saw mental health as a means to other ends, not as the end in itself. And that gets to this whole well-being issue, is where does this mental health stuff is catalytic to let other good things happen, or is in the way of other good things happen. And so let's intentionally position it so it has that added value.
So you know what, it just makes too much sense. So tell me how it, you know, where did things, if not fall apart, like what was the obstacle to the fact that everybody in this room doesn't know about Thrive now? The fact that
Yeah.
And doing some of in reading, I was a little sad, more than a little sad, to hear how my journalistic brethren played a role in that, which I'll own up to later. I wasn't me personally, but I could sort of see it. So what was the impediment to this becoming like
In
the
part-
thing that we all know
In
about?
part because I think the mental health profession has done a really good job
Mhm.
of convincing a lot of culture and a lot of the political world that mental illness is a biological illness. And I think the intention of trying to reinforce that was to destigmatize it, but I think it's actually, in some cases, in some ways, runs a risk of doubling down on stigmatizing it because it medicalizes it, it boxes it into a very more tight space when it's actually something that is a very free roaming and insidiously important thing to not think is containable in that tight space.
So you're
And
good because
so-
I
so
was
the
going to say
blowback we-
interest groups.
So the blowback we got
Yeah.
was, well, the only thing that the city should really be worrying about is not all this foofy stuff with kids, but is the guy who's screaming on the street. And that has been a pattern of politics around mental health policy that recurs. I call it law and order mental health. It is, that is stigmatizing. And it sets up actually also a really false zero-sum game that we have to choose between.
Oh, you mean like, so you're saying violent, visible,
violent, visible,
destructive,
disorder.
dysfunction, public, that's the focus, and why are you
Right.
spending all this energy on
Yeah.
this other stuff and not the thing that's in front of my
Right.
face that scares me?
Now,
Got
the
it.
mental health
Mhm.
system itself has
Mhm.
also really failed, often largely because it's been under-resourced to fully meet the need of people with serious mental illness, psychotic illness, and so forth. And a lot was infra to fix that. But the approach that we did to bring better supports to people at that end of the spectrum and you know, to the total spectrum was to the same thing. What can we bring that goes to where people are at? Not has to bring them into a hospital or emergency room or a clinic. And so to me, that is the operating system shift. It denies that there's a spectrum we have to choose from because actually people move along that spectrum all the time.
Mhm.
It's the operating system that designates just certain places to deal with it rather than deal with it for what it is, which is a psychological wrecking ball that affects everything that we try to do. So we have to try to put the work everywhere.
Interesting. Well, here's the journalistic part of it, that I'm not going to call people out, but there are certain journalistic institutions for whom I have great respect, who felt that the budgeting wasn't what they thought it should be, or they couldn't recognize that the budgeting was dispersed because the programs were dispersed. And basically we're like, this is messed up and this is not there's no accountability here. And then that became a problem.
There was snarky journalism, but I think that ultimately there wasn't political courage when there was attention to really kind of soap opera and false sort of accusations that were somewhat racist and misogynistic to the mayor's wife, Shirley McLean.
McCray.
McCray.
I get it. So, fast forward, we promised we talk about climate
Yeah.
change. So what's the relevance to climate change?
So the relevance of climate change.
Because for me, the cautionary tale could be sad, because the sad part could be, wow, you tried something big, people didn't get it. And because you didn't have instant success at it, then
People got it.
you
People
know.
got it.
Mhm.
So the places we went to got it.
Mhm.
We did 10 months of canvassing around the city. What are the mental health gaps? And everyone was asking for, we want to do it. We want to put it here. We had town halls. The folks who were mostly affected and facing unmet needs and burdens, they got it. We still had a lot to do around the politics of it, because what it does is it says, it's not just that mental health has to look this way. It's that we have lost attention and care of our communities. We're not nurturing our population. We are failing in very deep social repair ways. That's what got it into trouble. But that's the truth of it. And you're not going to solve a mental health crisis if you don't do it in that way.
Well, you know,
And
this is the
so,
same thing with climate change. If you don't name it, you can't fix it. But then
Right.
there are people who won't name it. So what's the relation?
So what
you know?
this whole argument that we need a Thrive sort of approach has been much easier to make after COVID, sadly,
Interesting.
because people get what happens when the social fabric unravels and how it affects or makes it really hard for us to do things together. And that it makes us all go a little crazy, and that hurts, and it really hurts our kids, and it affects lots of things, and we're still not over it, and that's a problem. Well, the effects of COVID is a walk in the park compared to what climate change is starting to do and will do in terms of that unraveling of social fabric, of that great challenging of our desire, of our valuing of collective efficacy, of reciprocity, of social ties, of all the sort of connective tissue that Tony Earls was trying to draw on to save this kid. So without that, we can't do anything and we're miserable. And then we begin to hate each other and fall apart. And we talk about climate tipping points of the Earth's climate, that we get past a certain heating and melting and so forth, that these natural systems are just going to start unraveling and we can't dial it back. Well, there are social tipping points too. And once they start to unravel, we can't dial them back either. So when I felt personally I had to do something about climate change, rather than get arrested, which I did, which was gratifying, but not a long-term solution. I thought, well, what do I bring to this? And here we have we know from tremendous evidence now, we don't need more evidence, of the multiple ways and the just emanating tragic multiplying ways that climate environmental change elevates depression, anxiety, suicide, substance use, et cetera. But the weight of that again on really stretching social trust, collaboration and so forth, which we desperately need, because the transitions and changes that we're going to have to go through and rely on each other for are going to really require that, because it's going to push every button that Thrive pushed, but up the volume of equity around well-being outcomes, of examining what are the social drivers of that, and that we have to hurry up and deal with them. Otherwise, we're just going to leave huge segments of our population, usually the most climate vulnerable, behind. So the mental health piece of climate change is not just, oh, there'll be more depression, so let's get, up our staffing ratios. It's that the mental health community has to realize it is really critical to sustaining a social backbone, to have a sort of life and community that we feel we can live and endure with the challenges ahead.
I'm going to ask for questions to start coming up, questions, comments. You're all adults. You don't have to ask a fake question just because you want to say something. So, but how does bioethics interface with this?
A couple of ways, and my relationship with bioethics has been, and actually with all this stuff I'm describing as a historian. So I'm a psychiatrist, but I in a fit of intellectual masochism, I got a PhD in history, which I never regretted. And even when I was the New York City mental health commissioner, people would ask me, "So do you ever use that? Do you ever use that PhD?" I said, "I use it every day." Because none of these everything I'm talking about is not new. This sort of interest, Eric Lindemann, I mentioned I worked in the Eric Lindemann Mental Health Center in the 1940s. He started making these connections between traumatic events and community well-being and connectedness and so forth. And when he used this term, when the Eric Lindemann Mental Health Center was named after him at a ceremony, he said, we have to show government that the people who are coming to us are not ill, but they are casualties of problems that they're not solving. And so we see these awarenesses surface, but and good solutions of how to put them to work happen. There was innovative stuff in the 50s, 60s doing exactly the Thrive-like things I just described. But they come and go because I think we lack a certain connection to democracy as about care, as about exercising care. And my work in bioethics has really looked at medicine as an unheralded and underpowered pragmatic institution. And I use pragmatism from a philosophical school sense, that it is a great broker for trying to bring knowledge to bear in a very problem-solving, pragmatic way. And you have a Linda Min or you have a Tony Earls who are kind of seeing that opportunity, that what we have to bring has a lot to offer. But it pulls on these restrictions of who has something to say about these social issues that medicine somehow cedes ground to, and certainly mental health, I think, cedes ground to, which I think is ethically irresponsible.
Interesting.
Because we actually not just only have knowledge, we have a way of applying that knowledge in pragmatic ways that I think are really necessary now.
Well, so you've given a call to arms to people in your field with your training. But before we leave tonight, I'm going to ask you to give the rest of us homework and tell us what those of us who aren't trained in your field should be thinking about. And so but we'll do that after we do the questions. So come on, bring on those. You know what the other point I would make here is that while I look at these is, you know, one of the sad things you have to learn as a journalist is some people don't care what's true. They like their story better. And so you've talked about the deep research that there has been, and there's actually experience, there's data, there's experience, there's real world experience. Some people don't care what's true. They like their story better. And I'm just really curious about how you think about that while I look at these questions.
Well, I like my story pretty well. And so what I'm doing now is I'm taking all the stuff that I learned is doable from Thrive, from other countries, and working with race resilience, global-sized efforts at building climate adaptation capacity globally in the most affected parts of the world where 4 billion people live. And we are presenting a plan at COP28 on how this race to resilience, which has that ambition, can incorporate the work of psychological resilience to reach 4 billion people by 2030. And it's by embedding the work in the ways that are already mobilized in community, leveraging that way that they're already growing agency through what they're doing by the participatory nature of it. All that stuff is actually mental health stuff. And we're bringing in these other skill sets and perspectives.
Do you find that people are willing to, I'm just noticing the fact that, I don't know if you all are paying attention to what's going on in Washington today, but there's a lot going on in Washington today. In both the House and the Senate, 2 different people threaten to beat each other up. Isn't that, yeah, the former Speaker of the House is accused of kidney checking a guy while he was actually talking to my colleague. He was doing an interview with my colleague. The former speaker is accused of going up behind him and hitting him in the kidney. He says it hurt. And on the Senate side, a senator threatened to beat up a witness who was testifying in front of him and offered to take it outside because he didn't like something he tweeted. This happened today. So I'm sure you have thoughts about that. Okay, here we go. A recent article talked about the potential for new therapeutics like psychedelics to address anxiety and depression related to climate change. But the question is, shouldn't people be anxious about climate change? Do we really want to alleviate that? Interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you talk to youth and they, particularly climate youth activists, they really resent this notion of climate anxiety as an illness. It's an awareness. It's actually a signal that people need to listen to, resent that people aren't listening more than, and what helps, I think climate is also opening up this inventiveness about marrying social solidarity with emotional well-being. And there are a lot of youth organizations globally that have created novel ways, eclectically borrowing from principles of group support and psychological interventions, but really tailoring it to how do we make sense of this together? How do we, this weight, this distress, it's not going to go away tomorrow because this isn't going to go away tomorrow, but how do we channel it? How do we work through it? How do we know how to share it? But how do we not let it diminish us? How do we find solidarity to act? So it's really agency seeking. And a lot of this data that I recognize in passing, this notion of hope, for example, which sounds fluffy, but it seems to describe a sense of agency and trust that can be life-saving, that really can predict life trajectories. And so you find youth, for example, that tend to score most in surveys about anxiety, climate change, self-forming and seeking ways that they can come up with that right mix of agency and solidarity building and emotional support. And I look to some of those as how-to manuals. Oh, that's how we should do community mental health in the face of climate change.
I got to tell you, hope doesn't sound fluffy to me at all. I mean, I feel like hope is kind of the central question of some of the greatest thinkers of our people of our time. But I mean, maybe that's just me. Does framing the climate crisis or other pervasive issues of our time as a mental health crisis change the burden of addressing it from government or large corporation actions to individual choices or individual health decisions? Do you find that empowering or problematic? It's a long it's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a risk in this whole notion of climate adaptation. I mean, adaptation could be playing defense or offense, right? It could be sort of trying to minimize really bad stuff, but that means kind of accepting or acknowledging that, well, bad stuff. Or it could go on offense, right? Adaptation can be to try to restructure things and to reinvent things and the way we do things. And so I think it's, as it plays out on the ground, it's a mixture of both. And both demand different psychological strengths. There are real strengths to cope, and we know what some of those are, and a lot of this task sharing work I mentioned is that. But there are real psychological strengths that we also know how to grow to drive change. And both of those sort of skill sets and those tools and methods, when I mentioned it can be done by anybody, it's also sort of happening everywhere. It's happening in our schools, it's happening in our workplaces, it's happening in our homes, it's happening all over the place, but we just need more help to put it on steroids, the way we can grow these tasks of care and change together ourselves, because that's how you're going to build a fabric that can stand up to when whole communities have to move because of flooding, when there's just serial storms that just really make it hard to have economic stability and so forth. When parts of the world now that I'm working on with this race to resilience effort, where you just have massive in-country migrations, which we will have, and which is starting, and we're totally unprepared. Man, are we unprepared for such social relocation, such migration within our country, let alone from others.
It's interesting. You've got a couple of questions to that point. One is that I'll just read them both if that's okay. It says, given that the effects of climate change are felt to varying degrees, depending on many factors, geography, socioeconomic, et cetera, how can a mental health lens or healthcare-based solution be utilized equitably? And another says, what are ways that we can be informed by indigenous knowledge to promote mental health? How is the climate crisis related to intergenerational trauma? How is state violence related to mental health? I think both of those are related to what you're talking about here.
So there are two big premises. So this report that we're writing, how you reach 4 billion people, has two key premises, and they actually sort of go back to, again, 20-year-old premises. One is you start where the person is at, or in this case, the community is at, or the organization that we're partnering with is at. One example, Slum Dwellers International. They work in 20 countries. They work in informal settlements globally. How do you do climate strengthening of housing, right? Infrastructure. So we asked them, as we asked all of these partners, which is as we asked members of departments of government when we did Thrive, what is hard for you? What is hard for you that this might help with? And so their answer to us, their initial answer to us, the vanguards of climate work in our neighborhoods are our youth, and they're suffering. Can you help them run peer-led emotional support groups? Yes, we know how to do that. We can do that. We can do that at scale. So one thing is you start there. What's their theory of change about how mental health can help them do something else? And that just then hones this in a very different way. And then you start at the places that have the most need.
This is a question that speaks to that. It's funny, did you have spies out there? Because they're all kind of
My
tapped
sister
into
is
you.
looking over.
This is the case you begin with of a 15-year-old and retributional violence in the role of psychiatry is so poignant. Are there similarly poignant cases? We can see the connections between mental health and the cycles of problems. That's kind of one of that climate change will produce. You know what other thing I was also thinking about when you were talking is, I was in Ferguson, Missouri, like a couple of weeks after Michael Brown was killed. And, there was, as I think all of you remember, there was just, there was these spasms of civil unrest. How people can call it whatever they want to call it, the Quick Mart where he had got the confrontation with the clerk was burned. And this happened right around, and then the school was starting. And remember, you might remember, people remember the original incident. What many people may not remember was that his body lay in the street for 4 hours, unattended to, not covered, whenever, I was in Japan when the former president Bush threw up. I'm sorry, he threw up. I'm sorry, he had stomach flu. It wasn't terrible. Immediately they moved to sort of protect his dignity, right? To sort of protect him and sort of cover it. I wasn't sorry not to see more of that. Okay, I'm just gonna tell you, but they left this man out here. They left this young man, his body in the middle of the street for 4 hours. And, his mom was screaming and saying, that's my son. Okay, 4 hours. Okay. So school starts a couple weeks later. And is it any shock to anybody? The kids are getting into fights on their way home. Why might that be? And I remember, the reason I'm raising this is I remember that there was a lot of, as you might imagine, activism around that area. And, I was asked to conduct a number of community conversations. And I remember saying to, at the time, gee, are we going to give these kids some help? And I remember some of the activists getting really angry at me and saying, this is a political problem. This is not a mental health problem. And, and I was like, and I didn't have the language. Hadn't met you yet to say, can it be both and? Isn't it both and? Isn't that kind of what you're telling me all along? Is it's both and? It's both.
In our common language that we just, describing conflicts that are whirring around us right now, and other social failures and political failures, we use emotional language. People are traumatized. People are shamed. People lose dignity. But then let's act in them as emotionally driven things that we actually know how to give space to and give air to and give solace to and go upstream to. If our common sense is that there is this emotional volatility and suffering and suffocation, then let's act in response to it that we in fact really get that. And there are ways to do it, but we have to completely rethink about how we engineer not just how mental health systems work with communities, which I talked about, but how we make all these other places nurturing places. We know a ton about the key sorts of elements, behavioral elements of what are called nurturing effects, which just have such predictive value of better communities and better people, empathy, reciprocity, psychological flexibility, prosociality. We know how to grow those anywhere. So let's grow it.
So what's the impediment to that? Why is it, what's
because it touches on these other sorts of inequities, power differentials, economic interests, the way that we divide ourselves up gets in the way of doing those things.
But people like those things. Obviously, they hold on to them because it means something to them. I mean, why is racism still exist? Because it means something to somebody, right? Like, why is it that some people impoverish their own school systems? They'd rather you fail than they'd rather themselves not thrive rather than let other people succeed, right? It means something to them, or it wouldn't persist. So I guess my question is, how do you overcome that, you know?
Because racism is also protecting something. And so what is that about? What are people afraid of losing? And how does that get surfaced? We know a lot about how to set up parameters for groups to give up some privilege for what can be felt as improved community benefit. And Heather McGhee's book and The Sum of Us, and there's just so many good examples of how inequality drags everybody down. So what is the defensive mechanism of not wanting to lose some of that?
How can destigmatizing mental health in public discourse bring progress to UN climate policy?
I missed the first part.
Okay, how can destigmatizing mental health in public discourse bring
you know,
progress? And the reason I hope it's okay, I'm not naming the names of the people, because I figure people's questions, my experience of the world is a lot of times people ask questions for the other people who weren't there. So I hope you don't mind if I didn't call your name.
Yeah,
I hope you don't feel sad.
I have a view that may be a minority, but I feel experience has borne it out, that stigma fills a vacuum of the lack of good solutions.
Interesting.
And so we have to build better solutions, and we have to do mental health in a way that people feel is energizing their lives, is close to what makes their lives painful. And that means respatializing it and really making it everybody's business. And I think the mental health system has really, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, been a co-conspirator in that narrowing of what we think about mental health to be as a social problem, as a social problem driver, but also, therefore, that the solutions mean that the quarterback is not the mental health system, it's other systems with help from the mental health one. I'm still chewing on that stigma exists because in the absence of good solutions. I'm still chewing on that one for a minute. Like, aren't you chewing on that for a minute? He's dropping a lot of knowledge here. So give an example. I mean, is it like, why is it that HIV/AIDS is still stigmatized to some extent in a way that diabetes is not? Or is it before we had good solutions for HIV? Tell me, say more about that. Well, I think that did happen with HIV.
Once good solutions happened, like
when it happened, a group that was easy to stigmatize. It was the group that was stigmatized.
Right. Yeah.
It was gay men that was stigmatized, and so that.
But also, I mean, people remember Ryan White. I mean, kids.
Right.
You know.
Right. But as it became apparent that there were things that could be done, I think that turned a tide.
Okay.
But we shouldn't have to wait for that. But what we need to do is make that the headline, is that this is something we're going to work on together to fix.
I could see it. I think, for example, that's the so-called monkeypox, or I forget what the clinical name of it is. It seemed like that was like this short-lived terror, but then it kind of was tamped down very quickly because there were, in fact, efficacious solutions. And so it didn't have time to breathe and become its own thing. Do you remember, you know?
But I think part of the solutions is not only just the solution to the particular illness or whatever it is. Part of the solution is the social trust that we're all rowing together on this. And we underestimate the power of that. And that it just comes up in so many of these well-being measures that, you know, social trust and a sense of agency, and even in the face of climate change, even people who are like, think we're done for, if they're involved around agentic work about trying to, you know, row where we can together, it makes a difference. And it builds community, makes other things possible. And it makes climate adaptation more likely to aim for change rather than just settling for coping.
You know, I do want to, there's some really good questions about that's really honed in on climate, but I'm thinking about what you said. I'm really thinking still about COVID and the various responses to COVID. You know, it started out with, we're all in this together, you know, Tom Hanks, we're all in this together. And then it quickly became, actually, no, we're not. And it became an identity marker. Like I was reporting a story in Alabama, and it went to do some interviews at the State House, and all of the white security guards, I'll just put it this way, the Black security guards, the Black staffers, the Black elected officials, all wearing masks. None of the white people, none of the white security guards, none of the white staffers, none of the white elected officials. And I'm thinking, it's not about COVID anymore. It's an identity marker now. What is that? And I'm just, and the reason I think, you know, obviously COVID is, you know, an existentialist crisis as well as a, you know, but I look at our response to COVID and I think, wow, you know, on the one hand, you know, vaccines in record time, got lots of people vaccinated, people around the world, it was imperfect, but, you know, things happen. On the other hand, now it's like solidified. And some people are like, no and hell no, I don't care.
Yeah.
And even in states where the death rate was high, I mean, there was one state in particular, at one point, Florida had 1 out of 7 new infections, didn't change the political dynamics at all. You had testimonies from people who were COVID resistors, whose family members were dying, who tried to then sort of spread the word, didn't matter. So now it's solidified as a political thing, as opposed to a virus that we can fight. And I don't know whether that experience influences your thinking about this or how it does.
I think the psychological lens can add options to respond to that and to explain it. Certainly a lot of, you know, the horse is out of the barn a little bit in terms of making this partisan and fueling divisions that were politically useful to different parties. But what I think the psychological lens adds is, you know, how do we go about brokering hard? How do we go about brokering hard things? So one thing that you know, I mentioned agency and helpfulness and so forth, is one thing that redistributing the work, like we did with Thrive, is the sort of participation that it invited in co-defining what were the problems, in co-defining what would work. So you got these amalgams. Someone, you know, mentioned indigenous traditions. What cultural familiar ways of helping each other out, of emotional support, of dealing with trauma, work with these other sort of practices. And the value of participation, I think, also goes to this issue of how does our democracy inflame rather than become opportunities to reconnect across our differences. There's a growing work about how things like citizens' assemblies and other forms of participatory deliberation, collective deliberation, actually helps bridge that micro-macro gap. It's much easier to have those nurture effect attributes, pro-sociality, reciprocity, perspective taking, when you're in a small group, than when you are in a virtual, huge global group. And so we have to pin these things down. And that's one thing that Thrive did. And the way I saw this work done, that made me think of it, was it pinned it down. And the way we're trying to embed this work in climate adaptation, it pins it down into what people are trying to problem solve, and then it makes sense. We should have had, and we blew it with vaccinations too, to really try to hear from people, well, how does this make sense to you? What would make sense to you from what we know, and to treat people as co-creators and not subjects.
We have only a couple more minutes for questions, and then I'm gonna ask you to give us a closing thought, homework, if you will. But this is, I think, speaks to what you were talking about. What role does our increasingly digital life play in the alienation that people feel? How can digital tools be organized to promote the connectedness we need to combat big social issues?
Yeah,
one more after that.
I got good advice when I was in my first night as a physician, as an intern in medicine, by my the head of our residency training program. He said, Gary, my first night on call, so alone. He said, Gary, whatever you do, never worry alone. And it's actually really good advice. I use it all the time. So if I'm really worrying, I don't do it alone. But there is growing interest in mental health apps, and I mean, there's so many negative sides to social media and all that kind of stuff. It's isolating. You go down a rabbit hole of a select bubble of perspectives and so forth. So that's the negative side. But there's also this interest in this positive side, mental health apps, other ways of getting counseling on demand, texts, et cetera. But at least the evidence that I'm aware of it is that is a tool, but you should never worry alone. That it needs to be reinforced by experiencing these nurturing effects, of experiencing the value, as with Tony's patient, of parental involvement, that communities that make it obvious and daily experience that make it obvious that others have your back, that you're in this real effective community is still critical, and is going to be ever more critical, I think, as things unravel. We're seeing these in parts of the world that are seeing these, just repeated floods and precarious food and water supplies and economic stability and so forth. People are leaving. A lot of the social tipping points are unraveling, and so we've got to hurry up and shore them up.
I have one more question, if I could get you to answer this as briefly as you can, and then I do want you to give us a closing thought, if you would. A popular motivation for tackling climate change is the preservation of threatened animal species and gosh, I don't know this word. What's that word? Biomes?
I can't
know what it is. I don't know what it is. So I don't know this word. BIOMES? Never mind. Biome, how do you say that? Biomes. Sorry. I don't know that word. Sorry. And the biomes that sustain them, how can a bioethics lens help us evaluate and prioritize the needs of humans and non-human animals?
So again, I'm going to take my pragmatic. I have a view of ethics that I often worry it gets too distant from how do we solve this problem. And so there is evidence that generating nurture between people as more acculturated, how people grow up, what's normalized by other signals and ways that social institutions run and reinforce, that nurture for non-humans also elevates. So, for example, certain parenting practices that promote some of these, well-being effects also seem to rub off on attitudes that families together have towards sustainable practices, recycling, being involved in conservation efforts. So nurture begets nurture. And if we're not going to care for each other, how are we going to care for trees? I think has something to it. And so this mutually reinforcing cycle is really critical, not just to keep our social fabric together, to do hard things, which COVID shows us as a fabric we really need to lean on, but also because it helps with the culture change of being a more sustainable society, because that is a reciprocal, pro-social, mutually reinforcing, perspective-taking way of living, period, and of having an economy that works within those nurture boundaries is essential as well.
Well, thank you. I hope this has been nurturing and salutary. Just being together has been sort of nurturing and salutary. We only have a couple of minutes left, but do you give us a closing thought? Some of your charge is to people in your fields, but you also have shared, and one of the through lines of your message tonight is that we all have a role to play, and you don't have to have a PhD to fulfill it, although a lot of you do. But just give us something to think about as we leave here that would allow us to contribute in a constructive way to the world that we want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with, I mean, I don't know any of you. I know some of you. I know my sister. So I don't want to, I mean, giving advice is, I don't want to sound like I'm doing that. But sometimes.
I did you too.
Yeah, okay. But sometimes I have psychiatrists who come up to me and say, what can I do? The system isn't there yet where I can go coach teachers into a school. And so I think this is more general advice. So I say, well, what is a community institution that's important to you, that you love? Is it your church? Is it your YMCA? Is it your, what is it? And talk to people there. What do they need to be a care and nurturing contributor? And help them get there.
Okay. Dr. Gary Belkin, thank you so much.